welcome back to LF Tech podcast, where we speak with founders, operators, and industry experts at the intersection of logistics, technology, data, and operational transformation about what is changing right now and what actually works in practice. Today, I'm joined by Mike O'Keefe, Senior Product Manager at GBG company working in very interesting direction and space with identity and location intelligence, including address verification, data quality, and customer onboarding solution. Mike, thank you very much for joining us today.
Oh, no worries at all. Thank you very much for having me on here.
Yeah, it's a pleasure and actually really great to have you here today because address verification is often treated as the background process and in like something that might not be that important for people until they reach some pain point or some specific challenge. But in reality, as we know, it plays much bigger role in our life in general and in the software. It affects whether customers can be onboarded smoothly, whether parcel arrive at the right place, whether payments and fraud checks work properly, and if business can trust the data they use every day, basically. And as we know, AI at the moment is changing everything, and this space is also not the exception. Address verification becoming more connected to trust, to data quality, operational decisions. So today I would love to explore this central question with you: how AI is turning software verification into a trust layer for global businesses. And of course, as always, we will try to keep it very practical. So Mike, if you don't mind, let's start here. Address verification has existed for many years, right? It's been in different formats and different forms, but now AI is changing what the system can actually do. From your perspective, what's the biggest shift happening in the market right now?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question. And there's a lot of shifts happening in the market, but I'd say the biggest one at the moment is that address verification has kind of moved from being a back office data cleansing job, and it's become more of that real-time trust layer that you're talking about. That means that more automated decisions lean on it. So it used to be historically that a business might do a nightly batch cleanse of their database, or maybe even monthly or bi-monthly or something like that. And now that's sitting live in a checkout or in a know your customer flow or in a logistics routing decision. And increasingly, with the big shifts happening at the moment, in front of those AI agents that are transacting for people. And AI is really the catalyst on both sides of that. It's made the input messier in some ways because people can type in single lines, or they can use voice, or AI agents might pass data around. And at the same time, it's raised the stakes because more of the decision after the address is automated now. So the values, it used to be kind of more around that format that address string nicely. And now it's, can I trust this location enough to act on it without a human looking at it, which is a different and kind of more valuable question, really.
So it's not only about like the address itself or correcting the postcode, maybe the street name, but becoming like a wider data foundation that business can rely on before making the decision. Basically, everything is now starting and actually getting around those points about the data, about the foundation. If the address data is weak, the impact can appear much bigger and much later in the process, right? During onboarding, maybe payments, fraud checks, returns, or anything else. So yeah, it's interesting. It's becoming less of the just contact detail and more about the trust and the foundations which we built on top of. If we compare this to more traditional systems that often depend on rules, reference databases, and fixed address formats, where do those methods start to struggle? What do you think? Especially when business operates across many countries, for example.
Yeah, it's a really difficult kind of challenge. And ultimately, that's kind of where Locate got started. We've got kind of decades of experience dealing with that at a global scale now, but it is a tricky one. And the thing is, it's not necessarily the data itself that struggles, right? It's the rigid logic that you have to put on top of that. If you think about it, there's roughly 250 countries and territories in the world, and all of those countries and territories write addresses differently. They might use different structures. So for example, in some places, the house name and street might be first. In other places, it might be last. They use different scripts and different languages. Some countries even use kind of more informal or colloquial kind of addressing styles. So a good example of that might be if in the UK, I might say I live at 1 Main Street. Somebody in India might say, I live at the house with the red door across the way from the statue, right, on Main Street. And that's a really difficult thing for an automated system to interpret. So fixed format rules don't cover those very well. And then you end up having to kind of tweak and tune your systems and spend a lot of time really trying to make sure that those work, even if you have good data that sits underneath it.
That's actually a very important point about this like global angle. Even in Ukraine here, we have in one city different street names because one part is just like before the name, there is one part which differs. Either it's a street or either it's something different like a prospect. It's Ukrainian word, I should say, but actually that's a very good point. And a process that works in one market becomes much less reliable in another, and just it's not universal, and people have to understand that. Very interesting. And actually this part brings us to one also point interesting, which is currently being very discussed in the AI context, which is address parsing, what you mentioned about the parts of the street. Can you explain what that is? Like what parsing, address parsing actually means, how it differs from validation, and why it matters in improving verification accuracy?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think it's a really important concept to understand because it's quite foundational for any part of address validation. So parsing is really about understanding the address. In plain terms, it's kind of taking like a raw address string, so like I said, 1 Main Street, and then breaking it down into those kind of properly labeled parts. So when I've said that, which part of that is the building number, which part of that is the street, what's the town, what's the postcode, etc. The reason why that matters so much is that everything downstream depends on you parsing it properly. If you put one of those elements in the wrong field, so if I put the house number in the postal code field, for example, then you're not going to be able to match that cleanly to your reference data, or you're not going to be able to say that's an address we've seen previously. And if that fails, it can kind of manifest in one of two expensive ways, really. Either you're going to falsely reject a perfectly good customer or an address, which has lost revenue and a bad experience for them, or you could falsely accept a bad address, which is a parcel that never arrives or an onboarding that shouldn't have happened. Better parsing means that you can have a better match rate and cuts down on both of those problems. But the main distinction, because you talked about what's the difference between kind of parsing and validation, is they're not the same thing. Parsing is about understanding what that address is. Validation is about proving that it's real. And that's where kind of the AI becomes interesting, because a general AI model is really good at kind of parsing, but it's not so good at telling you, is it a real address, or did it confidently say that actually something that looks like a real address is a real address? And that can cost businesses money.
So basically parsing is about structure, right? Structure of the address, while validation goes farther into the checks. If the information is real, complete, usable, if it's valid, and in general, if it's what we need, basically. Okay, interesting. Exactly. And you mentioned about AI. That's actually where AI becomes also quite involved, because AI can help interpret different data, right? Incomplete, messy, non-standard inputs much better than purely rule-based system at the moment. And we see that that is changing also and evolving really quickly. And at the same time, interpretation is not always enough, because today many businesses, they already use AI every day. And as you mentioned, general AI models, they can clean up the messy text, including addresses too. So from customer point of view, I would ask if general AI models already have that capacity to parse or to clean the data, what does dedicated verification provider still brings? And where is the difference? Simply parsing an address, that actually being able to use it?
Yeah, I think that's a really good question, and it's very topical at the moment. As I mentioned, a general kind of AI model can read an address really well, right? Like it's really good at kind of breaking down that address into its composite structure and understanding what those parts are. But what it can't do is tell you whether that place is real or whether you can deliver to it or where it kind of actually exists in the world. It's got no authoritative data behind it. So when it doesn't know, it guesses and it sounds completely sure of itself. In our world, in Locate, that guess is a parcel that might go nowhere or someone who fails onboarding. So AI is a really brilliant front door, but it still needs something solid that fits behind it. And that solid bit is real address data. And that data needs to be kept kind of current and with an answer that you can audit. And that's a hard thing for a lot of businesses to do on their own. And I think that's where address validation providers like Locate come in, because it's a living operation that's constantly evolving. There's not a kind of one-off training run that you can do because streets get renamed, new buildings go up, postal systems and addresses change all the time. And kind of that's what we do at the core of our business. We're aware that AI is a really useful tool, like I said, at the front door, and we actually use AI parsing in our technology as well because it is really good at what it does. You just can't necessarily trust the AI on its own without that authoritative data behind it.
I should say that this distinction is probably one of the most important points in this conversation. Like, clean looking data and address is not necessarily a verified address, and in real operation that difference is very costly, unfortunately, for many companies. And how do you make sure that the data and address information in Loki stays up to date? Do you have some specific processes or some specific databases which you check with, or how do you validate it inside of the company?
Yeah, so Locate has a data sourcing team, and we work kind of around the globe with hundreds of different data partners, some of which cover multiple kind of countries, some of which only may cover a small slice of a country. And those data sources might be things like postal authorities, they might be government agencies. We also might work with things like ride-sharing apps, for example, and sourcing that data. And what Locate's doing is taking a constant stream of all of this data, these addresses that are proven and that we can trust. And we're building all of that together into one kind of cohesive data source that people can access. That's being continually updated. We're continually looking at changes in address schemas for markets and what's happening around the world, and making sure that we've always got that kind of freshest data for people to consume without them having to go out to all of these different places themselves and try and stitch that all together.
So basically taking all the heavy lifting and all the checking verification on your own shoulders, and then providing client with just the result. That's actually very valuable, because verification provider, it's not only about the language understanding, right? But also about having those connections and having that knowledge to know where to look and how to find and actually have that information constantly updated.
Yeah, exactly. Okay. I think it's something a lot of people underestimate. They think they see addresses or they understand addresses in their home country and they think, oh, this isn't that hard. But once you start moving into those markets that you don't know that well, and you don't know the lay of the land, and you don't know who the kind of authorities are in those areas, it can get kind of overwhelming quite quickly. And we're just trying to remove all of that noise so your business can focus on the problems that it's good at solving, right?
Absolutely, especially when the company is growing and becoming more and more spread across the world and actually having more deliveries every day. If you have one delivery per day, of course you can check that manually. But if you have hundreds, thousands, or millions of deliveries, then it's just impossible. But yeah, there is Locate. Locate will look for it for you. Okay, Mike, that's very interesting. And I wonder, looking ahead, do you think that address verification will become more autonomous? Like, currently it's still a lot about manual work, unfortunately, but it's already part of the automation process for logistics and supply chain. And not only the checking addresses, but also like helping businesses decide what action should happen next. For example, should the system accept the order, maybe suggest a correction, ask customer for additional information or some detail, route the case to manual review, block risky transaction, or maybe even choose different delivery flow?
Yeah, I think it's been a general direction of travel for a while, and even before the advent of AI, a lot of businesses have been using Locate in order to improve their kind of autonomous decision making. But I think the general direction of travel is we are moving away from a verify this address to more like, given a verified location and some context around that, what should we do next? Should we accept it? Should we prompt for that correction? Should we step it up for some kind of check or reroute the delivery? Right? Verification becomes decision enablement rather than just data cleansing. And the place that gets really interesting at the moment is agentic commerce. So you're going to have those AI agents transacting and arranging delivery on people's behalf. Those agents need a trusted location layer to act on. So verification becomes the thing that the agent is going to call before it commits to doing anything. But here's the catch, and it kind of goes back to some of what we've been talking about, right? Autonomy without a source of truth just scales your mistakes faster. If the thing making the decision is standing on a guest address, then all you've done is automate the error. So the more autonomous these decisions get, the more they need something solid and auditable to kind of base themselves in, which is why I think automation actually makes verification more important, not less important.
That's very interesting direction, actually. And both parts about the foundation and about scaling the truth, not something false, not false information, is very important, especially if we move more and more toward the AI agentic forms of the automation. That's just becomes critical part. The question is no longer is this address like formatted correctly, but more like what should I do with it? What should the business do with this information? And I think that's where AI creates much more value over time, not by replacing every decision, but by helping companies and businesses make faster, more consistent, more confident decision based on the data quality of their address data. Yeah, okay, Mike, that's actually a very interesting conversation and insightful. I thank you very much for joining today. And I should say that what I take from this conversation and discussion today is that address verification is moving beyond symbol formatting, postcode correction, simple data checking, but more as businesses operate more and more in different countries, in new markets, address data becomes more complex, and a need for trusted, reliable location information becomes much more important. AI can help with that, but the real value is not only about cleaning the address, but knowing that you can trust this information, how confident the system is, and what action should happen next. And I'm really happy to see in the market companies like Lockheed who can support clients and people, companies all over the world with this need. And thank you, Mike, for sharing your perspective. And thanks everyone for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, subscribe, and share it with someone working in data quality, customer onboarding, e-commerce, logistics, fraud prevention, or global operation. It will be very valuable for people in different industries.